Okay, looks like we are recording. And guys, I'm so excited to have on the program Darius Fullmer. Now, if you don't know Darius Fullmer, he's most famous as being one of the SHAC 7. He did a year in prison following the repression that happened because of the Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty campaign. And yeah, like I have only interviewed one other person, Darius, from the Shat campaign, and it's a very interesting topic to me. So I'm really thrilled to be able to talk to you. And I should also mention that you're now working as an attorney for the Animal Activist Legal Defense Project, defending other activists when they may be in trouble. So thank you for that, and also thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate it.
And Darius, why don't I don't want to assume that people know a lot about the Shat campaign. We have talked about it on this program quite a bit, I guess, at this point. But why don't you take us back to what that was and how you got involved with it?
Sure. So I started my activist career in the mid 1990s in the New Jersey area uh, with a group called the Animal Defense League of New Jersey. And the Huntingdon Life Sciences campaign began in the UK and was really revolutionary, was something we hadn't seen before in the animal rights movement in terms of its approach, specifically the idea of targeting not just the company with protests, but also other entities that were involved with the company, whether that be shareholders or insurers or bankers or suppliers. Um, and the success that yielded was really revolutionary for the movement. We were aware in the States of what was going on over in the UK. We saw the success they were having, and ultimately, a lot of their shareholder base wound up moving to the United States. So that's when we came in, uh, because we happened to be in the state where the only U.S. Huntington Life Science facility was located. They had a lab in New Jersey. So we, the Animal Defense League of New Jersey, started doing some protests at the laboratory to give the campaign a U.S. presence. Before long, a more formal nationwide organization, SHAC USA, came along to organize the campaign from coast to coast. And we receded to a more supporting role of just focusing on protests in New Jersey itself, mostly at the lab, since we happened to be where the lab was. The campaign was worldwide, it was huge. At its peak, there were people in countries all over the place engaging in this campaign. And to give a little background, Huntington Life Sciences was at the time the second largest animal testing facility in the world between their UK and US locations. There had been a history of undercover investigations at the lab, revealing some really horrific animal abuse, particularly towards dogs and primates, that had garnered a lot of attention. So this was a campaign that in a way was a long time in the making, but really hit the movement differently because of the remarkable success that we were seeing up front.
Yeah, the Shaq campaign seems to be so notable for the fact that it was having such a great amount of success. There's a great documentary about it. It's been a while since I watched it, but it's called The Animal People, as I know you know. And I remember like one of the standout quotes from that is from Josh Harper. I know another one of the Shaq 7. I just remember him when he saw the images. I think that came out of the UK or one of the undercover investigations at HLS. He said something along the lines of like, I could not get that image out of my head. There was just some insane cruelty uh, that was compelling to a lot of people. So you're with the New Jersey Animal Defense League. Were you sort of a seasoned activist at that point? Because I think one thing that is also notable from my sort of limited understanding of the Shat campaign is that while it had like very, very intelligent people involved, and it was a lot of youth, like it was a young-led group. So how much activism had you had prior to that?
Yeah, I guess seasoned in the activist sense. I think we have a steep learning curve. So I began with my activism in like 1990. 1996 maybe, and the SHAC campaign would have come to the U.S. shores in like 1999 or thereabouts. So in retrospect, that only sounds like a few years, but I think we were pretty well established by that time,
Hmm.
and
Gotcha.
had been long enough to really see sort of an evolution within the movement as well, which I think it's crucial to understand to really grasp the importance of the SHAC campaign. Seeing where the movement was in the years prior to that, if I could go down that route for a moment.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
please.
when I first got involved, like a lot of people, I got involved through the hardcore music scene, through the straight edge scene. That was where a lot of us came from, and in New Jersey, nearly everybody in my organization came that route. So we were young. We were late teens, early 20s, almost exclusively, and angry. We were, young, angry punk kids, basically.
Mm,
And when we started out, I think there were a lot of Animal Defense League chapters around the country. So it was really a kind of a moment where grassroots animal rights activism was taking off in the mid 1990s. And there was a lot of energy, there was a lot of enthusiasm, there was a lot of dedication. There wasn't a lot of strategy, and in fact, that's probably an overstatement saying that there was strategy at all in the beginning. Protests would literally be, and this is also notably when the internet was really not that prevalent. So it's kind of a time before internet. Um, Protests would literally be open up the phone book and look for First or any other place that you think might be abusing animals and go have a protest. And there was no thought of what are we actually trying to achieve? What's the goal? How are we going to get there? It was very much simply find a building that's a company you don't like and go stand there with signs and yell at it.
mhm,
And after a little bit of experience, we evolved past that point to developing a bit more strategy. Though I would say our strategy was broken. It didn't make sense. And what I mean by that is, um, I think there was a point where we believed in protest above all. That protest was effective, and that if we weren't having success, and success meant shutting down businesses, is because we weren't doing enough protests. And there was a sense that if we just did more protests, then inevitably a business would just have to go under, right? Which doesn't, in retrospect, makes no sense whatsoever. But that was kind of the unspoken mindset was you just need more protests. So we would have a particular place we were protesting, say a fur store, and we would go back week after week after week. And if you've been protesting there once a week and it hasn't gone out of business, hasn't just miraculously, disappeared from the face of the earth, that's because you're not doing enough protests. And then you start going twice a week, and then that doesn't work. So then you start going 3 times a week. And inevitably, this was just burning people out, right? We have so much action happening. There's also a lot of civil disobedience happening. People are really, dedicating themselves and experiencing repercussions because of all this. And ultimately, we're not seeing results, right? Because it was a broken model. The idea that just more protest makes businesses disappear, because then you bump up against a business that's not just going to go under, especially if it's something like a first store where you're not asking for a concession, you're asking for them to stop existing entirely. They're going to put up a fight for that, obviously.
mhm.
Um, so we had this concept of just more protests, um, and people understandably got burnt out and disillusioned, and we had a huge turnover in the movement for a while. I think then after that there was this idea of, well, what if we just had bigger protests? Maybe we're being like too militant, too aggressive. We need to have a softer messaging. We need to maybe dress up a little bit nicer, be a little bit more approachable, and then more people will be willing to join our protests. And then so a bigger protest would get the job done. And what we found was the exact opposite. Protests were getting smaller and smaller. More people were leaving the movement. More people were becoming disillusioned. We were having less of an effect. And that's really the context in which the HLS campaign comes along, right? So the HLS campaign didn't exist in a vacuum. It came along at a time where people had been really just banging their head against the wall for years on end and not seeing results, not seeing any tangible results for their efforts. And then we saw what was happening in the UK with this campaign, where they were having tangible results and they're having them at a remarkable clip. They would go and have a couple protests at a shareholder's business, and they would sell the shares and the share price would drop. And it seemed like every week, every couple of weeks, there was a new victory that they could claim. A new supplier said they weren't going to work with this business anymore. Some other entity said that they were going to cut ties with this business. And that was something that we desperately needed. That was like oxygen to the movement in the US at the time, because what we needed was to see that our efforts and our sacrifices were actually having a result. And that's what the HLS campaign gave us.
Wow, interesting. So I've talked a lot about the hardcore scene and how it led to people doing activism. Um, and it seems like that there were pros and cons, like in the sense that, I've heard some describe how there was just this do-it-yourself ethos there, leaderless, and just kind of more geared towards action. And what it sounds like to me is like you guys, like you said, kind of there wasn't a ton of strategy, but there was a lot of action. Like you guys were getting out and doing it and doing it. um and so in a sense, um sometimes I worry that, and I've heard other people express it, that we almost, for a long period of time, kind of lost that because people were thinking too much and like thinking themselves into inaction in a way. And I think maybe the cell phones had a bit to do with that. People looking at their phones, doing cell phone activism, that sort of thing, which I don't discount. It's something to. But anyway, were there, like, so you said for this like couple of years you guys were working on like for like a store or something and kind of going more and more and more. Um and as people were getting burnt out, maybe even disgruntled, were there discussions at that, like were you hearing people say like we need to be a little more strategic about this? What are we doing wrong? I'm sure there was some second guessing about like what was happening. Um yeah, and also another thing that jumps out at me is that when it comes to like how a store responds or how police respond to the activists, I'm sure that they would start to get annoyed as over and over again would they have to keep going back to the same store. So was the police reaction getting stronger than when it started?
I think probably the opposite, in
Mm,
that when the places that we just protested, I think the police pretty quickly got a handle on who we were and what we do, and that they don't really need to worry about us. So yeah, we're going to stand on
mm,
the sidewalk and we're going to hold signs, and we might look quote unquote militant. Everyone was in camo pants and black hoodies and masks because it was the late '90s, and that's what everyone's kind of protest style was. And we yelled really loud, but I think they figured out that that was kind of what to expect from us. Where we had
mm.
a lot more kind of unexpected run-ins with the law was were the random places, were the places we showed up to where the police had never seen us before. And in New Jersey, that's particularly important because if you're in a place like New York City, you're going to see the NYPD every time, right? It's always the same police force. New Jersey is a mosaic of like 530 something different townships. So every place you go, you're dealing with officers who've never seen you before. So
Mm.
sometimes they would react poorly because they don't really know what's going on. You might just get some really bad cops in certain jurisdictions. So it was really when we went to new places that we were a lot more likely to have problems.
Gotcha. With the HLS campaign, because it targeted animal testing, it seems like that was sort of an open door for a little more heavy-handedness. And as you talk about your ties to New Jersey, it reminded me that it was Chris Christie who eventually was the future presidential candidate. He was the one who ended up prosecuting the SHAC 7. Uh, um, so, what are some lessons that some things that I want to get into you are, what's going on today. Obviously, we've had this big Ridgeland demonstration, um, but I want to kind of save that. But I kind of want to get into like how this time period may be similar in some senses, if you view it as similar. Um, but I really, but we should kind of stick to the Shack campaign and what made it so unique and special in a way. And maybe you could talk about your fellow defendants, because they seem like extraordinary people, and I've been able to speak with Andy at length about this. An extraordinary guy. The other is like there aren't a ton of interviews, and one thing I want to note is that. I don't know how many interviews you've done, but if you look you up on YouTube, you go back about 16 years to a talk that you gave in Los Angeles after prison, and there's really not a lot else. So on the one hand, my question is sort of like, why do you believe, like, with the exception of maybe Jake, a lot of people haven't been as forward facing in the years since? And then just like maybe give us a sense of what what they were like, because they all seem like very extraordinary people.
Yeah, so I'd certainly agree. They're extraordinary people. They're extraordinary people that for a lot of them I don't actually know that well.
Mm,
We were not working hand in hand, close together. I knew all of them to varying degrees, and I'd interacted with all of them. But the collection of people they chose to charge was, I think, in one way logical in that they charged the people who actually ran the nationwide organizing group, but then they also charged a handful of local organizers like myself, who I don't think I was, frankly, if I was to at the time have listed out the people I thought were most important to the campaign, I would not have been anywhere near the top. I would have been, 50 or so people deep. I was not a key person at all. So it's not like we were all, part of the same organization, working together day in, day out. Um, the the people who deserve the credit for being visionary in terms of bringing this campaign and the idea of the campaign to the US are certainly the folks who are working for the national group. The rest of us just sort of contributed to the work that they were doing, but that's what was really visionary, and moved the movement forward. And I think the what we see today of people adopting some of those ideas and some of those protest techniques, the actual SHAC organizers are the ones who deserve the credit for that.
do you think then that the reason that you were singled out as one that was prosecuted was just location, like being the Jersey local activist?
Yeah, I would be speculating. I think that would be my guess as to why.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
sorry, and in terms of our paths later on, yeah, I by far spent the least time in custody. My co-defendants spent, years in federal prison. Once you're out, I think you don't just hit the ground running, right? It's a complete disruption to your life. Everything gets turned upside down, and just rebuilding takes years. Just getting yourself to a place of stability. So I think it makes sense that folks haven't necessarily heard from us a ton, because there were certainly the years in prison and the years after prison of just trying to rebuild and figure things out.
Mm,
Um, and there's ultimately an issue too of, um, I can't say I know what's effective in terms of activism. I know that the HLS campaign ultimately did not succeed. I know that along the way there were smaller victories, and that was something we hadn't experienced before. So that was certainly, I think, objectively a step in the right direction. But ultimately, what brings about animal liberation, I can't say I know. I don't
mm,
have, so I don't feel the need to get up on a pedestal and tell other activists, here's what's going to work, here's how we're going to do this. I don't have that answer. And I love seeing the younger activists now bringing forth new ideas and, taking things in a different direction. And I think the last thing they need is someone who, have had their shot at doing something different, telling them this is how you need to do your activism. This is what you should do. This is what you shouldn't do. I think it's a lot more effective for kind of the older generation to say, look, we made whatever progress we could with the tools we had. Now, whatever you do, I'm going to support it, and I'm not here to second guess it. And particularly my role now as an attorney, I don't look at my role to tell anybody how to do their activism. My role is to try and clear a path to make sure that they can do their activism with as little involvement with the court system as possible. But
mm.
ultimately, I'm not here to tell them what's effective or what's not effective. I'm here to let them make those decisions and support them however I can.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, I feel the same way. Like I also have my opinions of what I think is the most effective, but it's honestly, it's not that strong because I don't know what's most effective. Um, uh, and I'd just be speculating too. So sometimes I think it can almost be counterproductive when there's a strong debate in one way or the other, or someone like sort of acting as though they know, because I feel like most of us don't know. I think that was one of the points that you made in that talk that you gave in LA, for it was like a conference, animal rights
Mm.
conference, I believe it was. One of the points that you were making there, is to not be afraid. And I think it's like, I wonder how you strike that balance of giving people, you know, the reality that, like you just told me, it's very disruptive to your life if you've gone to prison. Um, and it can kind of turn your world upside down. At the same time, giving a message that won't scare people away from doing big things. I struggle with that a little bit on this podcast too, because in bringing folks on who have like suffered consequences, I feel like it's very important to learn uh, their experience, and honor them and have people learn. But I'm also worried that people will get scared off from activism too. So how do you kind of strike that balance as someone who can speak to it so intimately?
Yeah, so I think that, the first thing is we just have to be realistic that like you're going to survive. The repression that we face as animal rights activists is serious and it's scary and concerning and all those things. But we're going to survive, right? Myself, the other members of the SHAC 7, like we're all still alive. We're all living happy, healthy lives, or at least as much as I think the average person. I don't think the case ruined any of our lives. So, and we faced, some of the worst repression. I think at least sort of relative to our activities. So we need to keep realistic that like this is serious. It's very serious, but it's not like life ending serious.
Yeah.
Um, that said, I think we have an obligation. So I think organizers have this obligation, more seasoned activists have this obligation, and then particularly me and my colleagues as attorneys more than anyone have an obligation to make sure that people have a realistic sense of the risks they're taking, right? And I'm not here to tell anyone if they should take a risk or shouldn't take a risk. That's up to them. But they need to have a realistic idea of what the potential potential repercussions are. And we get in trouble, I think, as a movement when people get in over their heads. I think when we see cases of people flipping on each other, people leaving the movement, testifying against each other, um, that tends to occur when people got in deeper than they really were comfortable with,
Mm.
and that happens when those of us who should know better aren't completely forthcoming about the risks that people are taking. So I think we need to be honest with activists about the risks they might face, and activists need to be comfortable or need to be honest with themselves that they are comfortable with those risks, not go in just hoping everything goes right, and then when things go wrong, trying to bail out by turning on one another. People need to be honest about if this is an acceptable risk or not, and recognize if there's a risk you're not comfortable with, that's fine. There's plenty of activism out there
Mm.
that is effective, that carries little risk, to absolutely no risk. There's plenty of things that you can do. There's plenty of things you can find that fit the risk profile that you're comfortable with. So there's no need to go step it up into another level because it seems exciting or because of peer pressure, because it's what your friends are doing or whatever else. You can stay within your comfort zone and avoid getting into those situations.
Um, you know, as it sounds to me during the Shack era, it was so unprecedented. So I'm wondering how, so when the repression started to happen, I'm sure some of y'all, like maybe yourself included, were kind of blindsided by it, and you could be forgiven. And I feel like organizers could be forgiven for not knowing that that was going to happen, because it did seem unprecedented. I mean, you had a lot of things occur like 9/11 that changed the landscape for things. And uh, So I'm wondering, like, when all this started to happen, did you feel blindsided by it? Like when the hammer started to come down, so to speak? You had shared with me the first time we met, and I said, and I mean this like no disrespect, but I shared with you that you were probably the member of the Shack Seven that I had heard the least from, uh, and about, um, and you had mentioned to me that partly that was because. Um, well, one, you had served less time, but you had also like you were not even really part of the campaign at the time when you got arrested, right? You were like working and you had kind of moved on at that point.
Yeah, I mean, other people were out there being, being vocal, being the face of the campaign. And then once the case came down, some of my co-defendants were um, kind of handling the responsibility of keeping people informed and letting people know what was going on and getting attention. So I felt like that was all being handled, and we don't need everybody to try and be upfront.
Hmm.
And yeah, we should remember anytime we're talking about activism, most people's lives don't revolve 100% around activism. We all have other things going on, and we should allow for the fact that people might come and go in their activism. There might be times in their lives where they have a lot of bandwidth, and you're going to see them a lot. And they're going to get a lot done. They're going to take on a lot of responsibility, and there might be times where they have to fall back and handle other things in their life. And as fellow activists, we should be cool with that. We should say,
Yeah.
it's handle what you got to handle, do what you got to do, and we'll be happy to see you when you have the bandwidth to come back.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen that a lot. Even in my short time in the movement, I've been vegan and an animal rights activist for about 8 years, so a relatively short period of time. But even in that period of time, I've seen people come and go. I've seen people take years off, go away for multiple years, and sometimes and see them again. And some people I never see again. Also, I think like in a sense that's okay too. Like, I hope that they're still doing what they can in their own personal life, but who am I to judge, really? So yeah, um, so you were sort of like away from the campaign, I guess, at that time, and then people started to get prosecuted. I'm sure it was kind of a stunning moment for you guys. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but what was that like? And again, prefacing this with I don't want to like startle people, scare people, but I think you said you were like working for a software company or something at the time. Am I wrong?
Not software, no. I was
Okay.
an emergency medical technician. I'd
Oh,
worked as an
okay.
EMT for like the better part of a decade
Oh,
in New
gotcha.
Jersey.
I don't know where
Yeah.
I got that from. Um, but so, it kind of, I guess it sort of came out of nowhere, or were you sort of expecting?
Well, yeah, I think at the campaign level, I think there was a strong expectation of something coming down the pipe.
Mm,
I don't think anybody knew exactly what that was going to be, but it was a big dynamic campaign that was getting close to shutting down a multinational corporation, and not only a multinational corporation, but a multinational corporation within the pharmaceutical industry, which has nearly unlimited sway in the government. Right, their lobbying efforts are second to none. So everyone expected there was going to be some kind of repercussion, and I don't think. I think it's fair to say, like, the campaign came incredibly close to succeeding.
hmm.
There were two instances I could think of. At one point, Huntingdon Life Sciences lost their insurance carrier because of protest pressure against that company, and nobody else would insure them. And you can't operate a business without insurance. And that should have, in a fair world, that would have been the end of the company. They would have had to shut down. And the UK government stepped in to insure them through the government. It's unprecedented.
Mm,
Second, they lost their banking facility, which I remember was actually surprising because no one had actually bothered protesting their banking facility. They were just too far down the list. No one had really gotten around to it. But the banking facility decided they didn't want anything to do with them, and they could not find anyone else to serve as their banking facility. So they literally couldn't like write a check to pay a supplier, for example.
mm,
And again, the UK government stepped in order to provide that service for them, which is unusual because they're a private entity, right? And the government is actually serving these functions for them. So without those two unprecedented steps by the UK government, the campaign would have been successful. Huntingdon Life Sciences would have closed, which I don't think you can overstate the importance of a group of activists, particularly grassroots activists. There was no major organization that was involved for much of the campaign. Um, and I know PETA did play a role in the campaign at one point, and I want to um, not respect the work that they did. But for
Mm,
most of the campaign, we're talking about grassroots people like punk kids with no money in their pocket, bringing down a multinational corporation, which I think would have serious repercussions within animal rights, but also beyond, for all sorts of campaigning against any variety of issues.
yeah.
So so that we knew that the powers that be were not going to let that just happen.
Mm,
Right, that was not something that was going to pass unnoticed. So I think there was a sense there was going to be some sort of repercussion. What
mm,
form that took, I don't think anyone was quite expecting, the Unwanted Rights Protection Act charges, and I wasn't expecting for me to be included in that. I thought I was too insignificant to be included. So there was an expectation of repression, but some of it was unexpected.
okay. Um, I wonder if you can take me back to that time and just like, what the energy felt like, because I imagine it was very exciting. I also wonder if the public was largely on your side, because, we're talking about cats and cute monkeys and stuff, and I wonder if the public had seen enough to get a full sense of what this company was like. Did you guys have the backing of the public?
Yeah, this was because it was when the internet was not nearly as prevalent and before social media was prevalent. What I see happening now with Ridgeland is an entirely different world. It's completely different. Where I see, um, you can look at a post of a major mainstream news outlet about Ridgeland and see people's reaction to it. Members of the public who are not animal rights people at all, and
Hmm.
and see the overwhelming support, which has really been shocking to me. But that wasn't something that we had during the HLS campaign, right? Social media was in its infancy. I mean, maybe it was on like MySpace at that point or something, but it really
Right.
wasn't. It really wasn't a thing. So I don't think we really knew what the public was thinking. I also don't think the public really knew about the campaign. It was more like us versus these industries.
Wow.
I don't think there was a lot of public interest or knowledge about what was going on, and the I don't think public opinion was really a focus of the campaign, nor was there really a means to make it a focus of the campaign at that point. So I think the what we're seeing now with Ridgeland is significantly different and better in that um, it is something that's catching the attention of a lot of people who might not otherwise be in the animal rights universe.
And do you think that is primarily a design of there being social media now?
I think so. Yeah, I think
Mm,
that's the key difference. And I think the activists are a lot keener now, in terms of being cued into how to put our message out in the public, how to get the public's attention, how to interact with media. I think we've just gotten a lot better at all those things.
mm. Yeah, I wonder if in the case of Ridgeland, where you've got attorneys and people like that involved, and um, as you described, the SHAC campaign is like a lot of people from the punk world. Uh, probably like, wearing all black and tattoos and all this kind of stuff, like definitely seem, I guess to the general public more like others, like
Right.
weird or different or something like that. But it seemed so fruitful. It seemed like there was so much energy and passion and action taking place. Um, and I kind of want to get it. We kind of glossed over your story of like you got into it from punk and like the hardcore scene, uh, but I'm wondering where your core conviction came from. Was it that, like that, where it, why and why animals? Because I know you've mentioned before you care about a lot of different topics, but why did you really hone in on animals as your cause?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know exactly. I'd say I grew up in a household where animals were treated as individuals,
Mm,
which doesn't sound like a radical thing, right? But
mm,
in in my home, we had a lot of pets. My folks would take care of like wounded wildlife or stray dogs, those sorts of things, and just treated them like they had some inherent value. And in retrospect, I think once you start with that understanding, whether that's something you're raised with, whether that's something you develop later in life, everything else just kind of falls in place, right? Like if you are someone who can look at an animal and say that animal's capable of suffering, that animal is an individual with individual thoughts and feelings, can experience happiness, sadness, can suffer all those things, and therefore deserves to not be caused to suffer. Once you just accept that, I don't have to convince you of anything else. I don't have to convince you that what happens in places like Ridgeland or happened in HLS are wrong. I don't have to convince you that a vegan diet is the ethical solution, right? I don't have to convince you of any of that because those pieces all just fall in place once you start with that basic premise
Mm,
of if someone's capable of suffering, I have an obligation to avoid causing them to suffer. Right.
yeah.
So I think those pieces just kind of fell in place. I think the kind of hardcore and straight edge movement, as you said, really amplified that and took this idea of if you don't like what's happening, don't like wait around for a corporation to fix it. This is very 1990s thinking too. Like, don't wait for the government to fix it. Don't wait for a corporation to fix it. Just go out there and do it yourself. Right. Like you don't need anyone's permission. You don't need to wait for like the professionals or the older people to step in and do it for you. If you want to see a different world, just go make that world, right? And if
Hmm.
that's because you want to hear a different kind of music than what you're hearing on the radio, like go make that music. If you want to see animals treated better than they're treated, take the obligation to go make that happen yourself. So I think yeah, they
Mm.
are definitely intertwined.
Does you this idea of don't wait around, and you mentioned the big orgs and how few of them actually got involved, at least in the early stages. Do you think that if the big orgs had your back more and gotten involved, do you think that would have helped push the campaign over the edge? I know it's probably impossible to say. And I and was that courted? Like, did the organizers of the SHAC campaign reach out to like big orgs and try to get their backing? Um, or were they just like, doing their own thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were attempts. I wasn't privy to enough of the kind of nationwide organizing to have specifics, but I totally understand from the perspective of those big organizations that it was way too risky. I mean, looking back on the Shack campaign, it was like off the hook, right? There was a
Mm,
lot going on, and there was
yeah.
a lot going on that none of us liked either, right? Let's be clear. Some of the activism that was happening none of us supported, and it eventually got to a point where publicly some things had to be disavowed because some of the things individual people were doing we didn't think were acceptable.
Mm,
So I don't blame at all any of the big organizations looking at the campaign and saying like this is not something we can align ourselves with because they have responsibilities, right? They have a lot of other things that they're working on that they have a responsibility not to jeopardize.
right.
So I don't fault them at all.
Mm,
And I don't know that it would have made a difference. There's always when if you're gonna modify your message, right? If you're gonna censor yourself to try and make someone else happy, you're not gonna be doing the most effective thing.
mm,
And I think that was one thing that was really kind of surprising to me about the HLS campaign is because it came out of this time period where we thought like let's calm our language down, let's be less militant, let's be less aggressive in our rhetoric to attract more people. Well, that just it had the opposite effect, right? Because then it
yeah.
didn't feel like we were accomplishing anything. We weren't even angry anymore. We were just having boring protests every week.
Hmm.
And then the Shack campaign came along, and they were like, "No, we're going the opposite way. Like, we're just going to say exactly what we actually feel,
Hmm.
and we're going to be as militant as the situation demands us to be." Right? Like, you see that video of a monkey getting cut up alive, like you can say exactly how that makes you feel, and no one's going to tell you to tone it down.
Yeah.
And what we saw was actually the complete opposite, which is people vibed with it a lot more rather than us trying to talk around and being like maybe a little bit um, less credible
Hmm.
about our feelings. When Shaq came along and was just full out, we're going to be as militant as we want to be. We're going to be as over the top as we want to be, people, and including people who are like more mainstream or like older people who weren't from the punk scene where they were like really used to that vibe, like people really resonated with that. And I think that that's something kind of universal in that we really censor ourselves within the movement. And then when we talk to people kind of outside of the movement, they expect even like a greater level of um, aggression than we're comfortable with.
Mm,
Right. I'm thinking when I was with Sea Shepherd, how many people, kind of like mainstream people, non-animal rights people, are like, "Oh, why don't you just use torpedoes and blow them up?" Right. Like that's kind of like
right,
most people's thinking outside the movement.
right.
So yeah, so I think that that kind of rhetoric actually made it a lot more popular, not less popular.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like how the animal rights movement, and in the case of Ridgeland, where there were statements made about the violent actions of the activists. Of course, the activists were never violent. Um, and then I'm always like interested, like when there's like now that we have social media and like you said, you can see people's reactions. There will always be somebody from outside the movement that is obviously not even a vegan that's like, oh, these people deserve exactly what they did to the animals, that kind of stuff. That if an activist were to say that, and some have, but if an activist were to say that, they'd be labeled an extremist. Yeah, and in the case of the SHAC campaign, I remember that a big sticking point, a big problem that y'all later faced was the website, right? It was
Yeah.
this website that you guys decided, or the organizers or whoever was running the website decided that they would post all the actions, whether or not they agreed with it or not, as you mentioned. Uh, did I hear that they would sometimes put a disclaimer, like some actions disavowed, like every now and then they put a disclaimer on some of the things that had occurred?
I don't recall if there were specific disclaimers, but yeah, that was certainly an issue at trial, was some of the things that have been posted to the website. And that really came out of the the thinking initially with the website is it's almost like a news service. Like they're
Hmm.
not there to censor and say like this is okay, this is not okay, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. If there was a report that came in that had to do with Huntingdon Life Sciences, it went on the website. No commentary, no, just it comes in, it goes on the website. It's a news service. If we get news, we put it on there.
Hmm.
And when that was paired with the rhetoric on the website, right, the general support for activism, the general support for the campaign, um, it gives the impression that the organization was supporting of all of those things that it was reporting. And eventually they did change their mind and be like, look, this is, we're giving the wrong impression here. Like, this isn't doing what we thought it would do. The idea was to just report on these things, but it's not coming across that way. And the policy was changed where then they did stop posting things that the organization didn't agree with. But of course, by that point, the evidence had been gathered and would ultimately be used against us.
Yeah. Do you think it would have made a big difference had there been like a separate, like a delineation, like here's a messaging board essentially, like this is a bulletin board of what happened. Uh, yeah, with like we do not endorse all this, like, and then a separate thing, I
Yeah,
guess. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It should have been two separate things.
Mm. Um, uh, you know, Recognizing that there wasn't social media, you could at least see like how the mainstream media reported on it. And I'm wondering, what were they ever sympathetic, or did it often come down to them reporting, the militant actions of this campaign, and yeah, I can't remember if I've seen like many media interviews that folks from SHAC gave. But how did they go? Were they often like, sort of like gotcha interviews, or I can't
Yeah, I
remember.
don't recall any interviews, but
Mm,
generally the media was about the activism and not the animals. I don't really recall any of
I
the
see.
mainstream media giving any more than like a passing mention of the actual abuses, which is something I think the movement now has gotten so much better at doing, is trying to keep the focus on the animals and not on the activism.
Yeah, yeah. And definitely during the trials and stuff, I've been really impressed with some of the open rescue people who've gone on trial and sort of tried to highlight the animals, so much to the point of, by the end of the trial, sometimes I've seen even the judges and even sometimes the prosecutors referring to the animals by the names given to them by the
Right.
activists. It's kind of a cool thing to see. Um, I'm wondering about, you mentioned you grew up in this family where there was a lot of dogs and stuff. How was, when you started to go through things like with the campaign and then also the trial and incarceration, did you have support from your family? Did they understand what you were doing? And did they back you in the sense that they understood your moral conviction?
Yeah, they did. They
Mm,
did. Obviously, it was difficult for them, but I mean, it should also be said that from the beginning of the case, we were extremely optimistic that we were going to win. Like there was in our minds, and certainly in my mind, and my impression is everybody else's. We went into that case fully expecting that we were going to walk out with not guilties, if it even got that far. I mean, we didn't even think it was going to get to trial. So when the case first came down, we looked at, okay, this is new law. This is not going to go anywhere. This is a nonsense prosecution. Then we eventually get to trial and we're like, okay, there's no way they're going to actually get a guilty on anybody with this. So, it's so I think there was a lot less concern as the case was going along because it didn't seem that concerning. It seemed like an incredibly weak case. So I think right up until we started hearing the word guilty, we were convinced it was going to be, um, it was going to be over soon.
mhm,
And then, when we did get convictions, I thought, for at least for myself, I was expecting a non-custodial sentence. The evidence against, particularly me, was so little of it, and the judge came very close to granting a halftime motion. Halftime motion is basically after the state gets to present all their evidence first in a criminal case. After the state is done presenting their evidence, if your attorney feels like they haven't presented enough to support the charge, regardless of whatever defense you're about to put on, if they just haven't gotten their job done, the defense can then ask the judge to dismiss the charges at that point.
mm.
And we made one of those motions for Andy and myself because there was the least evidence about us. And the judge hemmed and hawed for a while, and it came very close to granting the motion. And then ultimately was like, oh, let's just see what the jury does. But based on that, the fact that the judge thought there was so little evidence against us that it nearly warranted dismissal, we were certainly not expecting, or at least I wasn't expecting for myself, a custodial sentence. So even once we were convicted, I was like, don't worry about it. It's fine. It's fine.
Mhm.
So it wasn't really until sentencing that seeing things seemed as serious as they turned out to be.
Why? I didn't know that part of the story. Why do you think things changed? Was there pressure exerted? I mean, it sounded to me like if the judge didn't think there was a lot there, then he probably wouldn't have sentenced so heavily.
Yeah, I mean, for me, she did specifically point out that um, because I had had prior arrests and like civil disobedience actions, that this sort of idea of like, well, you haven't learned your lesson yet. We have to do something more. If there's anything more going on behind the scenes, I don't know.
Mm,
But that was the explanation that she gave. In retrospect now, also being an attorney, um, I think our defense team could have done things a lot better at sentencing. Um, the I think at least I was I had a fairly sympathetic story to tell, right? I've been working as an EMT for a long time in the community. We could have had my supervisors, my colleagues come in and speak on my behalf. We didn't do that. Um, and my ask to the judge, I was like, look, I love my job and I think I'm really good at it. I think I provide really important service to communities around New Jersey with the work that I do. You
mm,
know, I'm whatever sentence you want to impose, I just ask that it's not custodial so that I can keep doing my job and keep providing that service. And I think that's, now as an attorney, like, gosh, I wish, all my defendants had, were in a position like that at sentencing. But I don't think we were really prepared to take advantage of any of it. So I'd like to think that the services we now provide through the project would provide people a better, if not a better defensive trial, at least a better argument for leniency at sentencing in a situation like that.
well, I'm jumping ahead to talk about, like you said, the Animal Activist Legal Defense Project, but maybe we should talk a little bit about that because I've been just incredibly impressed with. the work that you guys have done. Um, I mean, the number of wins, like, I mean, maybe I'm not talking about the number, but some of the wins have been just like extraordinary. And obviously, there have been some convictions on really hard cases like Zoe's, but you're also like you said, there's impressive things happening throughout the trial, like maybe the sentencing, the overturning of Wayne's conviction in Sonoma County, the like getting activists off the hook for other things. It's been amazing. I know Stefan's sites that I got to know during Wayne's Sonoma trial, and just I'm so blown away by how impressive he is. Um, and yeah, maybe just tell me, like, I'm sure, like, when you were, sitting in that courtroom, did you ever think, like, one day I'll be an attorney here? Like, and where did that idea of joining, like an activist legal defense and yeah, like you said, like, had you had that, things could have turned out very differently, I think.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the SHAC 7 trial, um, I don't think there was any defense we could have put on that was going to change things, right? I
Mm,
think the die was cast uh, because in federal court, the win rate of prosecution is yeah, it's close to 100%. It's like functionally 100% because they have so much resources to work with, right?
mhm,
When you're being investigated by a federal agency, um, they have so much resources. They can spend all their time on you. They can collect massive amounts of information, which they can then cobble together to create whatever kind of impression they want.
mm,
So it's extreme, and they also have, they also don't bring cases they don't think they're gonna win. But yeah, they're massively successful once they get to trial. So I don't think there was much we could have done that was going to change it. So I don't fault our attorneys on that level. At trial, I think they did everything that was humanly
mm,
possible for us.
mm,
At sentencing, I think we fell short. But in terms of trial, I don't want to give the impression that I thought we were getting less than stellar representation.
mm,
Um, but where that's not true is all the other little cases that popped up throughout my early activist career. Because early on, we had no legal support whatsoever. Eventually, we did have a lawyer who volunteered for us to do some things, who did his absolute best. He had very limited time because he still had to do his regular practice and family life and everything else. He did the best for us, but for a long time we just didn't have legal support in any way, shape, or form. There was no National Lawyers Guild. There was no organizations that helped protesters, and so we just got hammered in court. Because we would show up on our own. The first time, I think the first time I ever set foot in a court was we were having a series of protests at a first store in Red Bank, New Jersey. And typical protests, standing with signs on the sidewalk in front of the store, chanting, that sort of thing. There was like one sit in in front of the store at one point, which was pretty like milquetoast. It was really just people just sat down, refused to move, got picked up by the cops, and that was a little um, civil disobedience action. Nothing really spicier than that at all. And then one day we showed up to a protest and we were served with papers for an emergency injunction. And again, this was before the internet was really prevalent. So if you've ever seen the movie Office Space, where they
mhm,
actually they someone mentions money laundering and they have to
mhm.
like look up in the dictionary what money laundering is, like that was us. We had to just pull out the dictionary because I had no idea. I'd never heard injunction. I didn't know what that meant.
Right,
And we
right.
had to be in court the next day. Like we were scheduled the next day for a hearing on this injunction, and I didn't even
Wow.
know what an injunction was. So we called people who called people who called people. Finally, at like 3 a.m., we got an attorney in Hawaii on the phone for a few minutes to just talk us through like what an injunction actually is. But
Wow.
we didn't have anyone to call. But there was no one. There was no support for us. And I showed up the next day, and the first store had their like team of attorneys that they'd hired for this purpose. And I was like, I mean, I'm sure I was wearing cargo pants. I didn't have anything fancier than cargo pants and like
Mm,
maybe like a short sleeve, button up shirt, like as fancy as I could get at the point. And had to just try and make a legal argument for like I had no idea what I was doing, and that was typical, right? We'd find
mhm,
ourselves in situations like that. Um, there was another arrest I could think of where this was It was a residential protest in a very wealthy town in northern New Jersey, at I think it was a Bank of New York vice president's residence, and they were involved with the lab at the time. And we went for our first event there, and the chief of police showed up, and he was very chill, very professional. Explained to us like, okay, here's where you can stand, here's what you can do. There's no issues at all. Very good interaction.
Mm,
And then we came back a couple weeks later for a candlelight vigil. So we weren't even like chanting or making noise. We're literally just holding candles, right?
mm,
What we didn't know is there was a uh, officer in an unmarked car in the driveway, which apparently there was 24/7, right? This is the kind of like police service you get when you're the vice president of a big bank and living in a very wealthy town, is they just stationed an officer to sit in his driveway 24/7.
wow.
So as soon as we walked up, the officer got out of his car, sprinted across, and I was standing right on the curbside where the chief of police not long before told us we were allowed to stand, and like tackled me, full on tackled me.
Wow.
And I'm like, bro, what are you doing? And he's like, you were trespassing. I'm like, no, I wasn't trespassing. Like, this is exactly where your chief told us to stand. Um, and I showed up to court, right? So I knew enough about the law by this point to know what discovery is. That means all the information that the prosecution might use, they have to show you beforehand. And it was such a nonsense case. I was like, I might not, I might ask our attorney friend to help us, but like that might not even be necessary here. So I I sent a letter to the prosecutor. I was like, hey, I'm requesting discovery on my case, and I just never got any response. And I show up to the first court hearing and um, go before the judge, and I say, look, I sent a letter to the prosecutor asking for discovery. I never got anything. And this is 20. This is probably 25 years ago at this point. I remember this so specifically because this is the thing more than anything that like drove me to the work I do now.
Mm,
Because I'm still angry about it. Like you see, I'm balling my fist. Like it still gets to
mhm.
me. He said, "Discovery, you're not a lawyer, right?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not a lawyer." He's like, "You wouldn't know what to do with discovery anyway."
Wow.
And he's like, "Do you have an attorney?" I'm like, "No, I want to see the discovery first, whether I just, before I make that decision." And he's like, "No, we're going to trial right now." And I'm like, "What do you mean we're going to trial right now? Like, I'm not ready to go to trial. I haven't seen the discovery yet. Like, if we're going to trial, I might want a lawyer, but like, this is a preliminary hearing." He's like, "No, I feel like we could just do trial right now." And like right there and then we did a trial. That was the first trial I ever did, long before I became a lawyer, was I had to do an entire trial off the cuff with like zero preparation. I'm alone in the courtroom, didn't have any supporters there, like not a single person. So it's a
Wow.
bunch of cops. It's like the Bank of New York person. And we later learned that this judge is personal friends with that Bank of New York person. That came out in a subsequent case. So the
Mm,
subject of the home protest was personal friends with the judge, and he should have recused himself, absolutely, and didn't. Um, so I just had to do a trial off the cuff. So when I was later a public defender and training up new attorneys to do their first trial, I'm like, look, I know trial is stressful. I promise it's not as stressful as the first trial I did, because you at
yeah.
least got to go to law school first,
Yeah. Right. Right.
and you'll get to do some preparation.
Wow.
Um, and the cop got on the stand and just lied through his teeth. He's like, "Oh, yeah, I saw Mr. Fulmer walk across the grass, and he walked all the way across the lawn, and he was up on the front patio, knocking on the door or whatever." I'm like, "That's just, I'm not saying like stuff like that didn't happen. Didn't happen that day, right? Like it was simply not true." And I didn't, how do you handle that? Like
Yeah.
when an officer of the law is getting on the stand and just telling a story that never happened, like I was at a loss. So got convicted, wound up doing like a month in county jail off that.
Wow.
So, that's the kind of thing that happens when there aren't movement attorneys, right?
Yeah.
When there's no one to speak up for you, when there's not like that phone number you can pick up the phone and call in an emergency situation. Um, that's where I see the real value of our work is just making sure no one's in that situation where they have to go it alone. We can't necessarily parachute in like on days notice and be there for everyone all the time,
Yeah.
but we can at least be available for a call and like help find them the support they need.
Yeah. Um, well, that story is so extraordinary in how unfair it was. Did you, and you got to tell me like what it felt like. It must have been so stressful, but I'm just, it seems so egregiously wrong that was there a remedy after that you could take? Like,
Well,
go
I mean,
ahead.
if I had any legal counsel, yeah, like,
Yeah.
if someone came to me and was like, hey, that's the thing that just happened to me, I'd be like, okay, here's what we're gonna do. Like, we're gonna file an appeal, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. But like, I didn't have anyone to go to, so it's just, get
Wow.
out and dust yourself off and get back to work.
Why, so were you at least able to get like a public defender, or did you just like not know that that was a right that you had, or
So you don't always have a right to a public defender.
uh,
So it's possible that I did not have a right to one, but I actually don't know in that jurisdiction. I certainly wasn't advised of the possibility. But I told the judge that I wanted, if we were in fact going to trial, I wanted to retain an attorney first because we did have that one attorney we could call. I just didn't want to overburden him too much. So I did have counsel available,
mhm.
but he just wasn't there that day. Uh, so yeah, I was there was no opportunity to retain counsel, public or private.
I thought you always would get a public defender because, like, as part of your Miranda rights, when they read them to you, it's like if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided to you. Is so I've learned something new from this interview about the legal system. Is it common? It seems like it would be uncommon for that to be the case. Is
So I think in any competent jurisdiction, like where I practiced most of my career in King County, if I I'll give credit where it's due. If something like that was happening, um, public defenders would swarm that courtroom and make sure it didn't. And I think even the prosecutors would not let that happen. It would, would, if not stand up to the judge directly, would at least be sending messages to their public defender, uh, people they know in the public defense office, be like, hey, get someone over here and help this guy out.
yeah.
So yeah, I think, but the thing is, like I said, New Jersey is this mosaic of 500 and some different jurisdictions. So you have these town courts that are like just little kingdoms, little fiefdoms,
Hmm.
um, and the local judges have so much power and control. And I think just some of them will do what they want.
Wow.
Um,
So yeah, tell me, like, I mean, you've sort of told me what it was like. Obviously, super stressful, but I wonder if you can like paint that picture for me a little bit too, because talk about being under enormous pressure and having to like run the gauntlet, so to speak. And like not knowing have any idea what you're doing, and then of course like you mentioned, this police officer is lying through his teeth, and everybody defers to the police because he's the man of authority, and you're this punk kid, I guess, at the time. And so
yeah,
like it, wow. Yeah, so what was that like? I mean, to state the obvious, but yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think especially coming from where I was, right, coming from the punk scene, and that there was so little trust in authority. There was so little trust in anything in the government or anyone in a uniform that it was really just felt like, yeah, that's how they do. That's what to expect. I think now that I've seen a lot more, I'm a lot older. I've seen a lot more places, a lot more things. I'm a lot less distrustful now, honestly, because I
Mm,
recognize that my experience there was largely abnormal. And in our work now, we see that from time to time, but I have a little bit more trust that, that's it happens, but it's not so common. The system does sometimes do a decent job of protecting people's rights. Varies vastly place to place.
mhm.
But at the time, I think it felt like, yeah, that's what to expect from these people.
Yeah. Wow. The we've talked a little bit about Ridgeland. I'm curious, and you mentioned how uh, there's not a ton of like ALDP is small, mighty but small. And so I'm wondering, there's so much going on right now. People are being prosecuted in California for rescuing goats out there. People are being prosecuted for rescuing the beagles. At the time of this recording, we don't know if this will stand or not, but there are four beagle rescuers who are slated for trial in September, including Wayne Chung, facing like 30 plus years, 31 years max. So you're getting stretched thin. I don't even know which cases you guys are involved in, probably all of the above, or, to some
Yeah.
extent. Yeah. So that's it's a problem, isn't it? Like, because there are, do you think the movement right now has the capacity for a large scale prosecution like that? And I was just reading, like, there have been like really massive. I was reading about Stop Cop City, where I
Right.
believe like they put like 60 plus people on trial for that. So it's not like they won't just do that at times. And I think I've heard a lot of people say, oh, it's unlikely they can't charge everybody, but I mean, they will charge a number of people.
Yeah, so that's a line of thinking I heard a lot as a young activist, which I think was really people who kind of came up during the Vietnam era, where you could have just these massive, tens of thousands of people protests and thousands of people arrested, and they could really overwhelm a system, right? It's also
Hmm.
before the systems had the benefit of computers.
Yeah.
So this idea of like, oh, we're just gonna overwhelm a system. And when I hear activists say things like that now, it's like, no, you're not going to overwhelm any systems. We
Mhm,
don't have those kinds of numbers, and the systems are too, too efficient, too effective now.
mhm,
Maybe we'll get to a point where I see we have so many people that you're going to overwhelm a system, but I think that's not realistic thinking at this point. In terms of our resources, I think something probably a misconception people have is that we can just represent everybody. So you have an action where 30 people are arrested, 30 people are charged, that we can just represent everybody, and that's realistically not possible under our ethical obligations. Generally defense attorneys, and since we work in the same office, we're kind of like functionally one attorney
mhm,
for ethical purposes. Almost 100% of the time, one defendant is going to have one attorney. It's extremely rare for one attorney to represent multiple people. There are situations where we'll do that, but that carries risk. And that risk is if anyone has a change of heart about what they want to do with the case, then we could find ourselves in a position where we have to withdraw from everybody's case.
wow, wow,
So
mm,
there's I think understandable expectation of like, oh, these are like the animal rights lawyers, like they'll just represent all of the defendants, and I understand totally why people would assume that. That's just not correct.
mhm,
So when there are those larger cases, our first, we have volunteer attorneys we work with who are fantastic. We need a lot more. So if anyone out there is an attorney and listening to this, go to our webpage and sign out our volunteer form because we definitely need more people.
mm,
But public defenders are, a resource we lean on a lot. And as a former public defender, public defenders get a bad rap, which is completely unwarranted.
mhm,
As a public defender, I saw my colleagues um, representing people day in, day out, and being in court every day. I would see private attorneys, and yeah, I think the best representation you can get is a public defender. So if
mm,
people are, and it varies place to place, right? There are certain places where public defenders are incredibly overwhelmed. I don't think I've never seen public defenders who are just don't care, don't want to do a good job, aren't competent. There are places where they're overwhelmed, but in places where they are not completely overwhelmed, they know the system, they know the local judges, they know the prosecutors. So I always advise people like if you can get a public defender, they're usually as good as you're going to do in a given jurisdiction. So we do work alongside public defenders, and it's a great combination when we can have a relationship like that, either with a local private attorney or a public defender, where they know the local system, they know the proclivities of the different judges, they have relationships with the prosecutors where they can get them on the phone and have a conversation, and then we bring in the kind of subject matter expertise, and that we've argued these kind of particular unique motions before. We've dealt with activists before, so it's a different type of representation, so we can bring in that sort of expertise.
yeah, yeah. I have seen where there can be tensions because of them not being an activist uh, uh, attorney, and maybe not fully grasping that the trial is in some cases about more than the activist, and it's about the animal, the victim. Um, yeah, but according to you, it sounds like, if there's like sort of like a public defender working alongside you, then that can be avoided, or for the most part.
Yeah, and one of our um, intentions in the not too distant future is to develop a training on how to defend activist defendants. So, along with the actual representation work we do, there's also sort of a um, training side or a public facing side where we do know your rights trainings.
Hmm.
That's something we rolled out really in earnest this year. So we make those available to anyone who wants them. And we've done them for large national organizations. We've done them for kind of mid-sized organizations. We've done them for grassroots groups. We've done them for kind of adjacent groups like climate defense groups. So we've put that out there as a service that we provide.
Hmm.
They're available. We do them over Zoom. They're like 90 minutes long, free, obviously.
Hmm.
And we'll do them for anyone. I don't care if it's like 100 people. I don't care if it's a big national organization. I don't care if it's a small grassroots group. I don't care if it's an informal collection of people. Could be like someone and their roommates. We're always happy to do know your rights trainings, and you can request them on our website. But that's something we've rolled out. We've trained I don't know, a couple hundred people, maybe a few hundred people at this point, on how to effectively assert their rights in a law enforcement interaction. So, we do other work besides just representation. And one of the efforts we have kind of in the pipeline is a training for attorneys on how to represent political protesters. Because, like you said, it's not standard criminal defense. There's some significant differences. In standard criminal defense, it's really each person for themselves, right? As an attorney, I represent a particular defendant, and my interest is purely in getting that defendant the best outcome possible, right?
Hmm.
Whether that's go to trial, whether that's try and get a decent plea deal, whatever it might be, based on that person's desired outcome of the case, based on their preferences. But it's not this kind of collective, what's best for the movement, what's best for the organization, what's best for the animals type of mindset. So you do need to learn how to do that. Even if you're an experienced criminal defense attorney, it's a little bit of a different world. So we're working on a training, so that would be available. So like public defenders, private attorneys, et cetera, to get those folks up to speed on the differences in representing activists.
Yeah. Well, you gave a great one to Animal Activism Collective, one of those Know Your Rights talks, who just posted it fairly recently. So I'll make sure I link to that below, so everybody should check it out. And I know that was you guys mentioned that was sort of you and Chris Caraway, your fellow attorney at ALDP, had mentioned that was sort of a almost condensed version of
It
it.
was, yeah.
Um, and maybe I'll ask you to do like a even more condensed, because I don't want to make you do a 90-minute presentation right now. But what are some of the, like, just some of the common mistakes that people make when they're dealing with the police, dealing in a law enforcement situation, and then based on what Darius says, you should also just go and watch one of those presentations so it can be more fully explained.
Yeah, and and if you have the opportunity to watch that video, that's great. But I really do prefer doing like live trainings, so
Hmm.
that people can ask questions and interact. I think it's a lot more fruitful. So if the video is the only opportunity, that's certainly better than nothing. But don't hesitate to reach out and request a training.
Hmm.
Either it doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be a lot of people. There's no minimum number. So I
Hmm.
really do prefer doing them live when possible. But
Yeah.
yeah, the basics of knowing your rights. It's honestly not that complicated. And this is based on federal constitutional principles. So this applies anywhere in the United States. If you're outside of the United States, I have no idea. I'm not a lawyer anywhere else. So
Hmm.
if you're abroad, ignore this. But these principles apply anywhere in the U.S., which is number one: don't talk to the cops if you don't have to.
Hmm.
And for a lot of kind of grassroots animal rights activists, I think that's really something that we pick up on pretty quickly. So that might be, that might seem like kind of an obvious thing, but for a lot of people, it might not be because we're taught that police are helpful and they're there to like assist you and be beneficial. So the baseline is you don't want to be talking to police if you don't have to be talking to them, and the reason is uh, you don't know what they're investigating, what information that they have, what information they don't have, what kind of mistaken assumptions they may be working off of. So you don't know what information is going to be harmful to you or harmful to someone else in your organization or a fellow activist, because you don't have the full spectrum of information. So any information you give, even if it seems completely benign, might wind up harming you or someone else.
Yeah.
So the example I would give is, imagine we're at a protest. Let's say a first store. It's a first store. We go and protest, and big protest, maybe a lot of people there, and nothing dramatic happens, right? So we stand there with our signs, we chant, we hand out literature to people walking by, whatever. Nothing too noteworthy happens. And I wrap up. Maybe I leave a little bit early, and I walk back a couple blocks to my car. And when I'm at my car, a couple officers walk up to me and say, "Hey, were you at that big protest over there?" Now, my inclination might be like, "Well, look, I did everything legal. I'm a law-abiding guy. Like, I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm not doing anything illegal. Um, and this is my constitutional right, right? This is a key piece of being American, is exercising our freedoms. These are a couple important freedoms: the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. So, like, why, I don't have anything to hide. In fact, I should be proud that I'm engaging in public discourse like I am. So why not talk to them?" So maybe I'm like, yeah, I was over at that protest there. And then maybe they ask a couple more questions, like, "Oh, we weren't over there yet. Like, what's that whole thing about? What's going on over there?" So I'm like, "Oh, there's this first store, and we protested." And they might ask questions, "Oh, why are you protesting at a first store?" "No, I'm an activist." So if you ask me to start talking about animal abuse, like, you're going to get an earful, right? So,
Hmm.
10,
Hmm.
15 minutes later, maybe I finish my response of explaining how horrible this place is and how horrible the fur industry is, and how, this place has blood on their hands, and we want to see them go out of business, and we want to see them close and everything else.
Right.
And then maybe they start asking me questions that are a little bit less comfortable, right? Like, "Oh, did you come by yourself? Did you go with the other people?" I'm like, "Whoa, that's a little, you want me to tell you about the other people who are there?" Like, but now
Mm.
the problem is I've started talking, and it's really uncomfortable to stop a conversation once you start it, right?
Yeah.
So maybe I answer some of those questions that if they'd asked them first, I definitely would not have, but now I've been eased into it. And whatever else they ask me, it might seem innocuous, but let's say a little bit after I left, someone put a brick through the window, and let's say that person looked vaguely like me. Like, I'm looking at you right now. We look, from a distance, like I could see us being mistaken for one another, right?
Hmm.
Um, so maybe it was someone who looked vaguely like me, and for whatever reason, they think it was me. They're like, "Oh, there's a guy who, like, vaguely matches that description." So now I've told them I was at the protest, which maybe ultimately, like, they couldn't have proven. Maybe they didn't have any information to show I was actually at the protest. And if they did try and arrest me for this, we would get up, in court and be like, "Look, was there any information he was even there, let alone did
Hmm.
this thing?" But I just told them I was there. But not only that, but I also gave them this lengthy diatribe about how horrible this business is, and they have blood on their hands, and I want to see them go out of business. Which, in the context of a jury trial, right, when the jurors hear that they're alleging I put a brick through their window, that sounds like a confession, right? That
Hmm.
sounds like a really good motive to want to put a brick through their window.
Yeah.
Um, so you don't know what ultimately is going to be harmful. So the safe response is to not give any information and not engage with them any more than you need to.
Hmm.
So then the question is, like, how do you do that? And it's really simple. And this is pretty much this is the important part of the know your rights presentation. Everything else is just icing on the cake. Um, the first thing you do is, if you're having a law enforcement interaction you don't want to be having, you ask if you're free to leave. If the answer is yes, you are free to leave, then you leave. And in that situation with where I'm getting in my car, like, that could mean I physically leave. If I was still at the protest and they had approached me, I probably don't want to leave the protest. I don't have to leave the protest. It just means this interaction is done with.
Hmm.
I'm not talking to you anymore. I could still stand right next to the officer. We're just not interacting anymore. So I'm going to ask if I'm free to leave. If the answer is yes, then we're done talking. If the answer is no, then I assert my rights. I'm going to say that I want to remain silent. I want to speak to an attorney, and I do not consent to any searches. And if you say those three things, and we don't need to get into at this point why they work, in the training we actually go into all the background of the legal basis,
Yeah.
but they work whether you know why they work or not, which is the beautiful thing. These are
Right.
not complicated statements, but they pack an incredible legal punch. These are things we've kind of carefully honed in order to do a lot of legal work. with while hopefully being relatively easy to remember. So the three things you say are, I don't want to make any statements, or I want to remain silent. I want to speak to an attorney, and I do not consent to any searches. And if you do that, you've done like 99.9% of keeping yourself safe.
Mm,
Because as a public defender, it's almost like a running joke amongst public defenders. How many people make statements? People will time and time and time again make statements to police that are harmful to their cases.
hmm.
And the reason I think that people do that is, you mentioned the Miranda rights before. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law if you cannot afford an attorney, blah, blah, blah. The first thing they say is you have the right to remain silent, yet nobody exercises that right. It's like
Right.
across the board, people feel the need to make a statement. And the reason is it's common sense. If someone is accusing you of doing something wrong, you want to defend yourself. You want to tell your side of the story, and you feel that you need to. If you don't say anything, you think you're going to look guilty. You think you're going to look like you are hiding something, and the police can use that against you, right? They can manipulate you with that by saying, oh, you said you want to talk to an attorney. Like, only guilty people want to talk to an attorney. You sure you want to talk to an attorney?
Hmm.
Or what do you think the judge is going to say when I tell the judge that you wouldn't let me look in the trunk of your car? What do you think the judge is going to think was in there? They're going to know you're guilty. And the reality is, in the court system, in our legal system, the fact that you invoke your rights cannot be used against you. So a judge cannot hold it against you that you refused to make a statement, you asked for an attorney, or you did not consent to a search. Most importantly, a jury will never hear that information. So when you're stopped by the police and you say, um, I want to talk to an attorney, the fact that you asked to talk to an attorney, it makes them stop questioning you. It ends an interrogation in its tracks. A
Hmm.
jury will never hear that you said those words.
Hmm.
100%. They cannot, because it's not a right if you get punished for invoking it.
Right.
So if people knew that, then they would probably stop making statements. But of course, they don't tell you that part. They tell you have the right to remain silent. They never tell you that your silence cannot be used against you.
Yeah. And then you've got open rescue, which is a very open, and so maybe we can get into Ridgeland and what you think about that, from an attorney's perspective and also from your own perspective. Um, yeah, we've got this, thing where people, went in, didn't hide it, um, to rescue animals. And um, how do you think this is similar and different from SHAC, I guess, in some ways? And do you I know it's, like, probably not appropriate maybe for you to speculate, or I don't know, but, do you think activists should be prepared for, a crackdown along the lines of what happened at SHAC, and in our history? Um, yeah, what do you think about that, if you're able
Yeah,
to?
sure. So um, it's always possible that there's going to be more serious legal repercussions, right? So I think people need to be aware, like we talked before, people need to know the risks they're taking. So there are significant risks in doing something that, even if in your heart of hearts you believe it's legally justified, we have to step outside ourselves and say, okay, is law enforcement going to look at it that way? Is a judge going to look at it that way? Is a prosecuting attorney going to look at it that way? And ultimately, is a jury going to look at it that way? Right? Because they're the ones who are going to decide how this affects your life, not your own, honestly held beliefs.
Mhm,
So people should be realistic about the risks that they're taking. And part of that risk is, is it possible that an open rescue is going to lead to federal uh, Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act charges? It's possible, right? So I think that should be part of people's calculus. I don't, I don't have reason to believe that that's like likely, that that's in process, that's something that's going to happen imminently. Like, there's no big red flags that I'm seeing
mhm,
for that, but it's certainly possible, right? It's entirely possible. And as we talked about, federal prosecutions are generally very successful. It's it's
mhm.
it's once you're in that situation, your likelihood of success is pretty minimal. So yeah, I think if you're engaging in those sorts of actions, you need to accept the fact that could be a reality that you're facing. Um, if people are facing state charges, they should be aware. I think everyone should consult with attorneys who are barred in jurisdiction where they're going to be taking an action about what are the possible consequences. Because like you said, in Ridgeland, there's often these scary numbers of years, but like, okay, is that, how likely is that? Is someone really going away for 30 years? So there's a question of what's legally possible. There's a question of, how do these cases normally shake out? And you need a local practitioner to give you some guidance on that. So you need to be ready for the worst possible situation, while hopefully also, we can't just hide under a rock and not do any kind of activism, because there's a very small outside chance of something really negative happening. So we need to have a realistic basis of like, okay, what is my actual risk here? What's the worst thing that can happen? How likely is that worst thing to happen? What's a more realistic outcome here? Um, and then the thing that no one ever talks about is restitution.
Mhm.
Um, and this is very state by state. And I'll say this is something I was completely shocked by, because in Washington, where I practiced for the most part, restitution is relatively limited. And that doesn't mean, people have activists cases here in Washington have had huge restitution, like life changing restitution. But looking out of state, particularly California, I've been blown away by how broad restitution is there, by how much, basically how much you can be stuck with for a seemingly simple action, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's a risk that people need to be considering as well. If I had to choose between being locked up for some short amount of time or having like a massive restitution, like the restitution might ultimately be more life changing than the time. So that's something people need to be rolling into their considerations as well.
Mm.
Is, if I'm gonna engage in this action, what are the likely consequences? Not just in terms of legal or incarceration, but what's the whole picture? There's
Right.
also, especially if we're talking about felony charges, Justice Sotomayor on the Supreme Court referred to it as civil death. So
Mm.
this is a concept that once you have a felony charge, you experience civil death. There's all these other consequences that are associated with it. Um, you might not be able to vote,
Yeah,
uh,
I've thought about
right?
that.
Which could be, given how our voting system is, a lot of people might feel like their vote doesn't really count, but maybe you're in a place that you feel it does, or maybe it's just an important right to you as a um, part of this country that you feel that's important to you. You might
Mhm.
not, if with a felony charge, or and some misdemeanors as well, you'll never be able to own a firearm again. For I think a lot of us probably are pretty anti-gun, is my
Mhm.
sense, but I've known activists who are also very pro-gun, Second Amendment, and that's an important thing to them. That's an important right that they don't want to give up. Um, you will experience, financial consequences. You might not be able to rent an apartment, right? You try and rent an apartment and they do a background check and they find a conviction. You might not be able to get student loans. There's any number of consequences beyond simply I might have to sit inside a cell for so long.
Mhm.
Licensing, there's a lot of state licenses that you might need to work that uh, you might not be able to get, or you might lose if you already have.
Mhm.
That's particularly important if someone is like a teacher or a nurse or anything that requires a state license. If you're going to engage in an action that carries a risk of arrest, you really need to take that. You need to consult with an attorney beforehand and see, like, look, is this something that could cost me a license that's really important to me, and then go back and reevaluate what your risk tolerance is based on that. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think we should be doing more vigorous work beforehand so that everyone understands the risks that they're potentially taking.
Yeah. So when you gave that talk in Los Angeles like 16 years ago, like, sort of the message that you were conveying is don't be scared, And I know I imagine that would still be your sense today, although that was 16 years ago, I think, when that video was posted. So do you feel the same today? Like you're saying to be aware of these potential risks, like they can be life-changing. Uh so how do we strike that, like, again, it kind of goes back to my earlier questions, how do we strike that balance between spooking people out of doing activism and uh yeah, and, like, I wonder, do you still feel the same, as you gave that talk before, don't be afraid, like they spent all this money, and like one of the things you mentioned, they spend all this money, all this time, all this blah blah. Here I am, I'm still at this thing, spent a year in prison. And it also, I'm curious what prison was like for you. I don't know if you want to get into that. But it's just interesting to hear. So yeah, like so that was sort of a two-parter, like what prison was like, and also do you feel the same way today as you did 16 years ago and giving that talk?
Yeah, and remind me if I forget the second part. So yeah, in terms of, how I feel now, I'm about to turn 50, right? So I'm in a much different phase of my life. I would say, like most young people, my scope, like how far down the road I was looking, was pretty limited. Um, I think I would have been more risk averse in retrospect now than I was then. But find me anybody who's, I guess, middle aged compared to when they were 21 years old or however, right?
Mm,
Inevitably, um, that's kind of the change in mindset. I would look at it like this: if someone believes that taking risks, uh, that risking bumping up against the criminal legal system is part of it needs to be part of their activism, right? And it doesn't have to be. Activism doesn't necessarily need to be of
right.
that sort. But if that's something that someone feels they need to be doing, um, I would advise people to think of it as a finite resource. If that's something you're willing to do, you might have a bunch of instances where there's not real repercussions for a little bit, right? You might have fairly minimal outcomes for a while, but sooner or later, your luck might run out and you might face repercussions. And you can only absorb so many of that, right?
Hmm.
People can only have so many cases, so many arrests, so many whatever. It's a finite resource. So my advice more than anything is, if that's a risk you're willing to take, to use it intelligently. And looking back on my activism, that's my biggest regret, is just sort of dumb arrests.
Mm,
Arrests that were not ultimately, like, I can't tell you how a given arrest would have actually helped animals. It was more, I got into a lot of pissing matches with cops where, here's a sidewalk, and I'm telling you I'm allowed to stand on this side of the sidewalk because that's what the law says, and the cop says no, you have to stand on the other side of the sidewalk. And like, I might know I'm right, and I might be right. I might be like, it's very clear that I'm allowed to stand on this side of the sidewalk, but is that the hill I want to die on,
hmm.
right? And our mindset, my mindset, and I think the movement's mindset largely, um, back in the day, was like, you stand on your beliefs no matter
Hmm.
what. So if the cop's saying stand on the other side of the sidewalk, like, no, absolutely not going to happen. Um, but ultimately, like, I'm not a standing on one side of the sidewalk activist. I'm an animal activist, right? What matters is, like, is this actually changing the landscape of animals? Is this saving animals? Is this changing public perception of how we treat animals? Like, what's the actual benefit? And if it's just me arguing with a cop about which side of the sidewalk I stand on, does that actually change the effectiveness of my protest? Is that changing an animal's life if I get to stand on a different side of the sidewalk?
Hmm.
Um, so I think having those sort of, like, more ego-based conflicts, right, is something I definitely would change now with my current perspective. Like, maybe it's worth just being like, you know what, fine. Hey, for the record, I think the law says I can stand on that side of the sidewalk. I hear you saying you want me over here. I just want to let you know, like, I'm going to agree with you.
Hmm.
I think I'm allowed to stand over there, but just to make everyone's life easier today, I'm gonna do what you're asking me to, right? Like,
Hmm.
so much easier, and then you avoid all the headache. And if you really want to do something that's going to involve a risk of legal repercussions, like, make it worthwhile,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, so ultimately, yeah, I don't think you should be scared, but I think you also should not just go out, like, kind of throwing haymakers at the world because you can.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
it would have helped you in the case of your prosecution had you not had those. Like as you mentioned, it seemed like the judge looked at those things and then she said, "Well, you're not learning your lesson, so obviously you need
Right.
to do some prison time." Um, so yeah,
And then there was a second part of your question too. I
yeah,
think
it was just sort of like,
don't want
what
to
was
ignore.
prison like for you? I'm sure you get that question a lot. I don't know how much you want to talk about it, but it's definitely interesting. And but I do, before we get into that, I do want to sort of reiterate what you had to say earlier that you don't have to do high risk activism. There's still other forms of activism, and I think. and you mentioned ego-based activism too. Like people should never feel like it's like you know, like the amount of risk you take like makes you better somehow. It doesn't
Right.
necessarily, like I think it's cool when people like push up against their boundaries and do as much as they can. But it just should be noted that um everybody sort of has a role in the movement, and not everybody is like going to be like best suited to doing high risk activism. And as you mentioned, like in the past, it has been people having bad outcomes because they took on things that they weren't ready for, uh, and then got blindsided by how serious it got. And then, yeah, we've seen that in the movement where people started turning on each other, and it's really ugly. And it can be devastating, not even just to those individuals, but to the movement as a whole, when sort of thing starts to happen. Because what I really hope is that if another SHAC happens, and I don't think SHAC had anything to do, but we definitely saw like a drop off of activists. And I think uh, what I hope is that, yeah, if people end up going to prison, doing prison time, that others aren't deterred from doing it. And I think one of the reasons that they might be is if they see that there's a breakdown in trust and um, relationships and all of that. So anyway, I'll say that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And if I could add to that, I think there's a risk in seeing activism that does carry legal risk as like kind of a higher point of activism than other activism.
yeah,
And that was definitely the mindset that I came up in, where like, oh, you're someone who like, does like cabling events or like outreach events sort of things. And like, okay, you're like, kind of a entry level activist thing. Like you're at protests, so like you're okay, now you're like more of an activist. Now you're like doing civil disobedience. Now you're like more of an activist. And it's not like hierarchical like that,
yeah, yeah,
right? And if I'm being honest, like, I did work with vegan outreach, like traveling around to college campuses, handing out pamphlets, and we toured with the Warp Tour, handing out pamphlets. If I have to look back, like that's the most effective activism I ever did.
interesting.
I
Yeah,
think that blows everything else out of the water. And that was absolutely zero risk, but that didn't get the kind of praise that,
mhm,
like no one's ever interviewed me about that, right?
mhm,
Like the interviews are always about SHAC.
right.
So we as an activist community tend to build up the things where there is a risk of governmental repression and that are more like edgy or carry more risk. But there are um, two people I can think of, John and Vic from Vegan Outreach, both of whom passed out was over 1 million pamphlets,
Wow.
right? Like
Yeah.
they're the best activists I've ever met.
Hmm.
No one like people don't generally interview them. People didn't want to hear their story because they're just standing on a college campus handing out leaflets all day. It's not like, there's no documentaries made about that. But that
Yeah.
sort of activism, I think as a movement, we need to like really build up like, you know, that's that's just as important as anything else we're doing. And it's not somehow less than because it's not carrying risk.
Yeah.
So we need to be clear. It's not that if you're not taking risk, it's like that you're less committed or less dedicated or care less about the animals, right? Like
Yeah.
it takes a lot of dedication to stand out there day in, day out, trying to talk to strangers and
Yes.
spending your time doing that. Like I think that takes a lot more guts than putting a brick through the window.
Yeah, and I've mentioned before, like some of the hardest workers in the movement are people you never see, and they may be doing things like the books for an organization or something like accounting or something like that, or it's something that you will never see, but it's like the work that nobody else wants to do, that kind of thing. um yeah. And yeah, do you worry, like I had John Curtin from Camp Beagle on my program. He made a point. I bring it up a lot because it kind of struck right to the heart of what I was doing with my podcast at the time, which was he was saying, we kind of romanticize this, like, people who went into laboratories and stuff. And he put it this other way of saying, like, people who were doing that kind of activism, it was just what they did back in the day. And now it's become this kind of romantic, like everybody's a hero. And he doesn't like it because he thinks it makes it sound inaccessible. It's kind of a different question than romanticizing, going to prison and that sort of thing. But kind of along the same lines, do you worry that we're doing both of those things. And I know you don't mind being on my podcast, but like in a sense, like you said, if you were doing vegan outreach, maybe, you're not on my radar in the sense that, you are because of what happened with SHAC and also because of your legal work.
Yeah, I mean, from what I see in the movement today, there's a lot more open-mindedness. There's a lot more cohesion, right? I mean, the thing that's probably the obvious example is the split between welfare and liberation, and people actually learning to work together, which was like something I never would have predicted a number of years ago, right? Because we
Hmm.
were enemies.
Right.
If one person's a liberationist, the other person's a welfarist, like you're just different universes in the fact that everyone can work together. So I hope that we can extend that kind of mindset to whatever kind of activism people are doing, whether it's whether it's like working quote within the system, whether you're working on legislation or whatever it might be. And I was really excited to see that included in the recent grassroots animal rights summit where we learned that. I thought that was one of the most maybe the most exciting presentation for me was learning about how grassroots activists got involved in the political system in Portland, and now just 2 weeks ago got a foie gras bill passed there.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Um, that's
Amazing.
amazing, and the fact that we can talk about that in the same breath as having people talking about open rescue or talking about direct action.
Hmm.
That there's not like this separation, right? That we can all just do our own thing and support each other and have each other's backs. I don't have to be into like your form of activism. You don't have to be into my form of activism, but we're all working on the same team. So,
Yeah.
I might not think that yours is the most effective, but like I don't have to do it,
Mhm.
and I'm not going to come at it like, well, I know what's right and like my way of doing things is the only way that's right. So, if we can support one another, whether that's the more moderate people supporting the more radical people, whether that's welfarists and abolitionists, whether that's people who work in the system or outside of the system, whether that's people who work for big organizations versus grassroots. Like the more we can just help each other out, the stronger this movement gets. And it's no coincidence that when if the if law enforcement wants to infiltrate, like if we look at the history of FBI infiltration of political movements, the first thing they do is try and turn people against each other, right?
Yeah.
They try and start stuff between people. Um, that's not coincidence, it's effective.
Hmm.
So so I think we counter that. I think we counter the narrative that one kind of activism is more valuable than another form by breaking down those barriers and supporting each other's activism, whether it's the thing that we really prefer ourselves or not.
Yeah, and I'll point out that in that YouTube clip that is on the internet of you from 16 years ago, that was your message at the time too. Um, so when it sounds like this is a lot more people's message today. Was that sort of a minority opinion back in the day, like of like or what? What would you say?
Yeah, I think to an extent, yes, there's a lot more criticism, and I think we can be smart and have, we can sit up all night and discuss like why we think one thing's effective or another thing's effective, and we can do that in a way that doesn't tear anybody else down,
Hmm.
right? So I think it's healthy that we have those discussions that we say like, hey, look, here's something I'm working on. I think this is really effective because X, Y, and Z, and that's different than being like, oh, you're doing that form of activism, like that's pointless, that's stupid, that's not going to achieve anything. Like I don't know how to achieve animal liberation, and I know that for a fact because we haven't achieved animal liberation. If
Yeah.
anybody walking this earth right now knew that had the magic bullet, like we wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd all be sitting on a beach, sipping drinks with little umbrellas in them because
Yeah.
we'd be done. So none of us have the answer, but there's always a tendency to think that like your way, that you got it figured out, and the thing you're working on and the way you're going about it is going to be the answer.
Yeah.
And then 5 minutes for 5 years, 10 years down the line, you probably change your mind and are into something totally different. It's like, well, were you wrong then? Were you wrong now? Like we
Yeah.
always think whatever we're doing right now is the thing. And the farther we can get from that, not only do we then build a more strong, cohesive movement, but we also build a movement where people don't feel like they have to push themselves into an area they're not comfortable with in order to be active and contributing and respected.
Yeah, yeah, respected for sure. Yeah, because yeah, I like that you mentioned like that there was this sense that like if you're doing like a leaflet or something like that, oh, you're just entry level. And yeah, that's just not the case. So I mean it could be the case. That could be like the first thing you do. But yeah, it doesn't have to be the first thing. It could be the last thing that you do as an activist. So yeah, so like I said, if you want to get into like what was prison like, I'm just
Yeah,
sort of like, your prison experience, and then the years between prison and now, like how have things been like for you, to the extent that you want to get into that. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
curious.
yeah. So I'd say at this point, like, let's see, it's 2026. So it's been a long time.
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and maybe, I don't know if I had to guess, like maybe once every 2 to 3 months, I actually have a thought about prison. Like
Mm.
it's so a different part of my life. Like I barely ever even think about it. It's not something that's a part of my day-to-day thinking. So when you ask about it, it's almost like, asking about like a movie I saw years ago. It's like, yeah, I have vague
Right.
recollections of it, but like it doesn't feel relevant to me. It's not like part of my life.
Mm.
Um, so I will say, different people have very different experiences. And I'm obviously coming in as a cis white male, so I'm coming in with like more protection than most people,
Hmm.
dealing with the system. And I feel like it definitely was treated differently by the system, by the COs. um, so I don't want to say like my experience is everybody's experience. Also, even just among my co-defendants, depending on what facility people wound up in, some people had much worse experiences than mine. My experience, I was initially classified as low security. So I was in um, the second lowest security type facility, which is basically it literally was army barracks that had been
Hmm.
converted. So it's the same conditions that people in our armed forces are going to have during their training. So
Hmm.
it's bearable, certainly. There's just a barbed wire fence around it, right?
Hmm.
But other than that, um, you know the the couple things that really stand out to me about the experience. The first thing is, and from having been locked up a couple times in different contexts, the degree to which people look out for each other is what really sticks with me. Like I said, I was locked up as a result of um, that situation where I was like forced to trial without an attorney. I wound up doing some time in a county jail on that, and then other times where I was just like locked up, like after an arrest and holding for a little while. And every one of those experiences, I've seen people sacrifice and share in a way that you don't see in the outside world, right? And we think
Hmm.
of these people as like they're criminals, they're like the bad people, they're dangerous. And the way people look out for one another, and from what I understand in women's prison, it's even more amplified, where people are show solidarity and look out for each other. But and when I was doing my federal time, the first day I walk in, and um, my so we're like 12 to a room. It's like bunks, 12 people to a room. The first thing my bunkmate says to me, I walk in, and he's like, "Are you straight?" He didn't mean like sexual orientation wise. He's like, "Are you okay? Are you
Oh,
handling
right, right.
it?" Right?
Yeah.
He's like, "Are you straight?" And I'm like, "I don't." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Are you straight? Are you hooked up? Like, do you have what you need?" I'm like, "I don't know. I think so." He's like, "All right. Do you have like you're wearing flip flops, like the standard issue flip flops? Do you have sneakers?" I'm like, "No, I don't have sneakers." Like, he's like, "All right. Someone go get this guy sneakers. Do you have toothpaste? Yeah, I got toothpaste. Do you have, we just running down the list. Like, here's all the things you need. Do you have snacks? Do you have whatever?" And they just sourced, like crowdsourced everything I needed until I could get to commissary. Like someone went and like found someone who was the same shoe size as me, who had an extra pair of sneakers, and like, yeah, well, you can get this, just get the next guy. And that's really like a common mindset of,
Hmm.
someone did something for you, now you pass it on to the next person.
Wow.
Um, yeah,
That's
not
cool.
what the
That's
movies
really
show, right?
right, right. Yeah. It sounds like, I mean, obviously that's dependent on, the people, the guys around you. So in a way you were really lucky to have guys like that with you. But I'm sure it is more common than you would think. And
Yeah,
that's cool.
and
Yeah, go ahead.
it's just same thing with county. I got put onto the trustee ward, so we'd have like a job, right? Which again
Mhm.
is probably like my privilege speaking, right? Like, why did I go straight to the trustee ward where you have a lot more freedom during the day?
Mhm.
Um, and I was in laundry, so we just spent all day doing laundry. And people always ask like, did you see were you ever in fights in prison? Did you ever see fights? Like,
Mm,
yeah, we had fights every day in laundry. We had pillow fights. Like that's how we'd
right,
entertain ourselves. We had pillow fights.
right.
Um, but the folks who worked in the kitchen very quickly learned that I was vegan and there's very little food, especially because this county, like the food is pretty much garbage, right? It's not like fed, like the food in the fed was decent. It was more than sufficient to survive.
Hmm.
Um, but there's very little options in county because it's made to be very short term.
Yeah.
So as soon as the guys in the kitchen, they're like, "Oh, this dude's vegan," whole loaves of bread would just appear in my cell every day, right? Like
Wow. Yeah.
I couldn't keep up with the bread. I'm like, guys, slow down on the bread. But like, people look out for each other. And I actually heard someone else mention this recently. I think it was Peter Young. I saw his talk. He mentioned this. It's funny because like the exact same thing happened to me. Is that in the mess hall, people learned I was vegan, and people would just walk up. Guys, I didn't know. Like I didn't know these dudes. There was like 2,000 men in my facility. Like I didn't know most of these guys. They would just walk up and like put their piece of fruit on my tray, and I
Yeah.
just have like
Yeah.
this mountain of fruit. I'm like, I eat this much fruit, guys. But um, people look out for each other,
Yeah.
and that gets to the other thing that really stuck out to me was one of the things that people really struggle with when they're locked up is feeling like they don't matter to anybody, like they can't help anybody, right? So I think that's why there's this real sense of like, oh, like that dude's vegan, he can't eat all that other food. Like I have an apple, I'm not going to eat, I'll give him the apple. It makes them feel like they matter to someone,
Mm,
like they're doing
mm,
something for someone. Some of the guys I was locked up with were working on trying to make it so that they could give samples for bone marrow donations. They wanted that to be like a thing in the prison, like everyone could be tested for bone marrow donations, right?
mhm.
Not what you think of like hardened criminals, but there's this desire, I think, this very basic human desire to feel like your life matters, right? To feel like
Yeah.
someone out there is better off because of you. And as activists, I think we take that for granted. That like we experience that all the time, right? We
Mhm.
get to feel like what we're doing matters and we're actually like making a difference in the world and helping someone else in the world. But that's a very basic human need that can manifest itself in good ways. And I think that's something as activists we can speak to, right? Like if
Mhm.
I'm talking to someone about veganism, the way I often talk about it is I don't start with like, here's some horrible things that happen to animals. I'm like, look, I get to do something awesome every day, right? Like every day I could just have like the laziest day, right? I could like be in bed watching movies, doing nothing productive. Like I'm still having a positive impact on the world, and that's an awesome feeling, right?
Yeah.
After you've done it
Yeah.
for a while, like you forget how rare that is. But like every day I'm doing something, I'm like proactively doing something that is making the world a better place,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's something people crave, and that's something we, as a movement, can really speak to. And that's, I saw that manifest. That really came to the front for me when I saw people locked up, where like the frustration they experienced of just not being able to do anything that mattered to anyone else.
Yeah. I imagine too, I mean, I didn't know you back then, of course, and hardly know you now, but you seem like a great guy. And I just wonder if it's they could sense that. Like just Darius seems like a cool guy. Um, and I think that goes a long way, like being cool to others. I mean, it's not like your humanity is gone, like if you're in a different setting, right? Like just uh,
Yeah,
now I'm
but also
talking about.
we need to give that benefit to other people too, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, absolutely. That's what
just
I mean. It's like you be cool to them, they're gonna be cool to you.
right, but also
Your
see their
fellow.
value, right? Like
Exactly.
one of the guys out of the 12 I was in my room with um, was by profession a circus animal trainer. He trained elephants. Yeah, he was from somewhere in the South, trained elephants. He had a tattoo on his arm of a fighting rooster, like with the metal hooks and whatnot. He was
Mhm,
very into fighting roosters and fighting dogs.
mhm,
And once people kind of figured out what I was there for, everyone was like waiting for it to happen. Right? Everyone was like waiting for it to pop off between me and him, right?
mhm,
And one day I walk into the room and he's in there by himself, right? And I'm like, oh shit, is like something gonna happen? I'm like, let me just talk to this guy and see what's up. So I'm like, hey, like, people told me about like what you do, and I saw the tattoo and everything. Like, I think people are expecting us to have an issue. but can I just talk to you? And we
Mm,
had a conversation, and we got as far as like he acknowledged that animals can feel pain,
mhm.
and he was like, dog fighting, like I probably like don't feel good about dog fighting, like that's probably not cool. And I was like, you know what, hell, if you can come that far, like I don't need to like judge you and expect you to like be vegan tomorrow, right?
Right, right.
But like let's see, is there any ground we share? Like we're about as far apart. Like I'm doing time on an animal rights case. You're a circus animal trainer who fights dogs and birds. Like, is there any common ground? We could find some common ground,
Yeah,
right? So like I think we should extend that, extend the courtesy to other people because not everyone's had the opportunities. I talked about the family I grew up in where I learned about respecting animals and their independence and their sentience, and like not everyone's had that opportunity. So if we can extend that grace to other people and be like, let's see where you're at and let's talk about it without me coming in and like saying like this is what you need, this is where I need you to be right now.
yeah.
Maybe we can make some progress like that.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me like not to make this political, but it kind of reminds me of multiple people have talked about how they'll sometimes get like a more positive response from like the conservatives. And
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons may be is that people are expecting you to like underestimate them or something. And if you show someone like the exact same, you treat someone exactly as you would treat the next person, not based on, like some like thing about them. Yeah, you will have that common ground like really quickly. I mean, it's a very cliche thing to say, but we are as human beings, animals, we have way more in common than we have disagreements with each other. And yeah, that's why I made that point. Like, if you're just cool to people, they're cool back to you because, well, for the most part. I mean, obviously there's exceptions to that, but it sounded like a really cool experience. The other thing, when I've had people on this podcast who have done prison time for animal rights activism, I I like to ask the question of like, and I've gotten mixed responses of like, you feel like you've been taken out of the fight for a little while, which must kind of feel bad in a sense, but in another sense, like you were sort of doing outreach with this guy who was, doing the circus stuff in a sense. Like, did you feel like at any point in your year-long prison stay like that you were able to like have some positive impact in an activist sense, like maybe even on the prison with prisoners or with the prison itself?
Yeah, I think probably more so, we were very fortunate, incredibly fortunate to have a lot of people writing to us, supporting us. So, more of my interactions, I think, I spent a lot of time reading and writing letters. So hopefully building community that way and helping other people like progress in their activism
Yeah, yeah,
through being in touch with people on the outside. I think that's probably the biggest benefit. The other thing, and this isn't quite, it's not activism related at all, but the the thing I knew enough about prison going in is to go in with a plan. So, if anyone does do time, this is always my advice to them, is figure out what you want to achieve while you're there, right?
hmm,
Whether you're going in for like a week and there's a book you really wanted to read and you haven't found time to, or like, you're going away for 10 years and you're going to like get a PhD in something while you're there, like whatever it is you want to achieve, go in with a plan, something to focus on. And
yeah,
that's what makes it tolerable. The worst thing is just sitting there staring at the wall, thinking like I'm just wasting this portion of my life. And
yeah,
it could be something totally banal, right? It doesn't have to be some grand like achievement. For me, it was running. Like I always hated running, and I was fortunate enough to be in a low security facility where we had access to a track like multiple times throughout the day. We had a lot of hours we could be on the track. So
hmm,
it's like, you know what? I've like always wanted to start, getting into running. Never had an opportunity, or never like had the interest really. Like this is a great opportunity for that. So I'd never run before I got there, and then I ran my first marathon like 2 weeks after I was released.
wow, yeah.
Ironically, wound up running with past one of the COs from the facility. I'm like, oh, what's up? I know you.
Oh my god, that's
Uh,
incredible.
yeah, she
Um,
was a little bit like, whoa, that's strange.
yeah,
But it was just, but having something like, okay, I'm waking up today and I want to achieve this thing.
Yeah.
right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
today, like I'm trying to run this many miles today, or it's recovery day. I want to like just having something you want to get done with that
Yeah.
time is what makes being locked up tolerable. Is having feeling like you're accomplishing something and you're moving forward and you're not just stagnant with your life.
Yeah.
So I think however long people are, if someone is going inside, like that's the key thing is to go in with a plan.
Yeah, I'll point out that's a great plan for being outside of prison too, is having a
Yeah,
plan.
yeah,
Yeah, because I mean, you can really stagnate on the outside too. How important were the letters for you?
yeah, super important.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, I think there's a kind of a little bit of guilt, right? Because we receive so much support, incredible amount of support, which I'm so grateful for. But there's also, if someone's taking time out of their day to write to me, and I see like different organizations will have like letter writing parties where they write to political prisoners, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
So I know people are putting an effort to make this happen, right? It's not just organic. Um, there was a point where I was like, look, like enough with the letters, like refocus that energy on the activism. Like I'm set with letters. Like you know, I
Hmm.
don't need 50 a day, right?
Hmm.
Like I appreciate that people care that much. But at the end of the day, like I don't want, me, and I'm sure my co-defendants felt the same way. Like, ultimately it's not about us.
Hmm.
And we were getting, we got what I felt was like more than sufficient support. So at some point you're like, okay, like put the time and effort elsewhere.
Yeah.
We're good.
Did you?
I did appreciate all the cat photos though.
Oh yeah,
There's
yeah.
like an endless stream of cat photos.
That's awesome.
Everyone.
Did you ever like form any kind of friendships with people that you had never met before? Like through the letters?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
that's cool.
There's a
That's
lot of
really
yeah, a lot of like long-term friendships came out of that.
that's amazing. Yeah, and it
My
must
like my partner who you might hear bouncing around in the background there, we've been together for what 18 and a half years now, and we knew each other beforehand, but like really our relationship deepened through letters.
that's
So yeah,
amazing.
it worked
Yeah.
out well.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, I'm glad you've been able to be so positive. And I mentioned in my question just sort of like the intervening years, like what what's happened since. And
Yeah,
obviously you're doing this great work, but yeah, what does your life look like now? I guess is one question. And was the reintegration like back from prison, was that tricky? And then yeah, what would you if you want to say like what would you say like your life looks like today? Yeah.
sure. Yeah, so I guess let's kind of go chronologically. So reintegration, I think it varies dramatically based on the type of facility you're in.
Yeah.
Because when I was locked up doing county time, even though it was only for a short couple weeks, when I got out for a little while, I was like dazed. I
Mm.
remember literally standing in front of a door, not like an automatic door, just like a regular ass door, and just standing there and waiting for it to open. Because in prison, you never open a door, right? If you're going somewhere, you stand there, and then like the CO hits a button and the door opens.
Right,
So
right,
even within a couple weeks, like I had forgotten the idea of like turning a doorknob and opening a door. And I
right,
remember standing in front of this door and being like, "Wow, that was quick!" Like I was only in for a couple weeks, and I got institutionalized pretty fast.
right,
And then you think
right.
about people who were in for years and how that feels coming out. That must be completely disorienting.
Yeah.
Coming up from my federal time was completely different. It didn't feel like a transition at all because it was low security. It felt more like the real world, right? The facility. I would think of it as like imagine a small college campus. It just has a fence around it. There's like different buildings. You go from building to building. Like the interaction and again, it's not, I think it's very similar to what people in the armed services go through in training, like the same kind of facility, same mess hall, like it's physically the same buildings, they just
Yeah.
repurposed. It's like same sleeping quarters, same mess hall, same track, same gym, same everything. So it's a lot more like the real world. Um, so I didn't really have any transition
Hmm.
challenges coming out from federal time. Getting back on your feet though, I mean, it's like it takes time. It takes a while um, just to get yourself back together. And I think what was interesting to me is the people who gave me opportunities, because jobs are always a challenge when you have a
Hmm.
conviction, right? The people who gave me early opportunities were not movement people at all.
Mm.
Uh, I was very into the rock climbing scene in the area I was in, and there was a dude I'd climbed with who I knew. He's actually an avid hunter.
Hmm.
He was a manager at a mountain sports store, and he's like, "Yeah, I got you. You got a job."
Nice.
So it's like
Yeah.
those sorts of people who just know you as a person,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I think that's, in order to get reintegrated, like it does become difficult to get that first opportunity. But if people know you as a person, they're not looking at the conviction, they're not looking at you as your record. They know who you are as a person.
Yeah.
So he gave me an opportunity, and things kind of snowballed from there. Um, but it was a number of years of just kind of getting myself back together. Then had an opportunity to volunteer with Sea Shepherd
Hmm.
on their the Waltzing Matilda campaign in 2009, 2010.
Hmm.
So that was an amazing opportunity. Traveled around the world. I was in Africa for a while, then down in the Antarctic. So that was something I was incredibly grateful to have that chance. Um,
It's
and
awesome.
then, yeah, I was very grateful for that. And then, I got to a point where I was ready to go back to school, and decided before doing that I was going to move out to where I am now in Seattle. And that's because that's where my partner was.
Hmm.
And when I came out here, my partner was president of the local National Lawyers Guild chapter.
Hmm.
So having seen in New Jersey, where we had no legal resources, where no one had our back, how damaging that was to the movement, like how much time and energy and focus that sucked out of us, and how dispiriting it was to have all these cases and no one to really help us. Coming out here, I saw a totally different world where Seattle has a very vigorous, well-established political protester defense community, the National Lawyers Guild, and all the volunteer attorneys and so forth. And I saw what a difference that made. Right, like I went to court. This is long before I was even thinking of law school, but I go to court and I saw her defend someone and win.
Hmm.
I'd never won a case, never. Like I never had a case dismissed. I didn't even know it was possible. Like I thought, okay, you get arrested, you're either like pleading to something or you're gonna get found guilty, and that's the only possibilities. Like I didn't know you could actually just like win a case.
Yeah.
And I saw her get a case dismissed on a pretrial motion, and I was like, oh shit, okay, that's different.
Yeah.
And I saw all the support that the National Lawyers Guild here was providing to activists, across the spectrum of, left half of the spectrum, but all different movements, all different causes,
Mm.
and how we have such a vibrant protest community here in Seattle. There's so much going on, and there's so much activism. So many people want to go out and make their voices heard in public. Um, and I was like, oh, that, maybe that's the next step for me. Maybe that's where I need to be. Right. So went to law school. Pretty much day one was involved with the National Lawyers Guild, doing know your rights trainings, a lot of legal observing. For those who don't know what legal observing is, it kind of grinds my gears that the animal rights community doesn't utilize legal observers more. Legal observers are mostly through the National Lawyers Guild. So
Mm.
they're folks who go out to protest at the request of protesters. They never show up just of their own volition. They come if they're asked, because not everyone wants them there. But if you do, you request them. You can go to the National Lawyers Guild website, find your local chapter, and put in a request. They wear bright green hats, so they're super easily recognizable, and their job is to monitor the police activity. So this
Interesting.
is
Yeah.
important. They're purely outward looking. So they're not there to monitor what the activists do. They're not there to like tell the activists what they can or can't do or should or shouldn't do. They're not watching the activists. They're watching the police, so that if there is a dispute, they can then get on the stand at a trial and say, look, this is what I saw. And these are generally lawyers, law students, or legal professionals. So they're people who would know it's like legally relevant to be keeping an eye out for, and then tend to be very credible witnesses. Thinking back to the case I told you about in New Jersey, like if we had had a legal observer there, I never would have been convicted, right? The legal
Right.
observer, an independent lawyer, legal professional, would have gone on the stand and say, like, no, this is what I saw happened. That dude was standing by the sidewalk. He never went up to the door. That's not true. So, they're available. The service is out there. For some reason, the animal rights movement just seems to not be really tied into that. But that's a
Hmm.
service we should really be taking advantage of, because we certainly like bear the brunt of police force, more than most.
Yeah, I'm guessing that animal rights movement doesn't really know about it because I had never heard of it really.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, um, and I should have. Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, incredible. Your life is extraordinary. Like similar to my talk with Andy, is flown by. Like we're at 2 hours 10 minutes, and it feels to me like a short interview because it's so interesting. Um, so I want to be respectful of your time and the listeners' time and not go too much longer. But I do always ask people like, what are some books and stuff that they recommend? And it could be animal rights, could be movement related, could be totally unrelated. Just stuff that they like. Books, films, whatever it is, and what kind of stuff you're into. Personally, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so like non-animal rights, it's kind of a running joke with my partner that there's really two genres of books I read.
Hmm.
One is mountaineering books. I read a ton of mountaineering books. There, like that's all them behind me there.
Oh, nice.
And then the other are what we call My Boat Got Stuck in the Ice books, which if you go to like Powell's Books in Portland has an entire section of these like adventure books, which inevitably on the cover have a picture of a boat stuck in the ice.
Nice, nice.
I love that kind of spirit of adventure stuff. I know it's like very closely tied to colonialism and super problematic, but I love the idea, like first person to reach the South Pole, first person to do this, like people just going off
Gotcha.
into the unknown. That
Yeah.
really interests me. Um, God, I don't know that I've read like kind of an activism related book in a while.
Mhm.
Honestly, after you kind of have been in that world for a little bit, you're like, yeah, I kind of get it. I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, there was one book, I'm trying to think of the name of it, about ideas being sticky that I thought was really interesting in terms of activism. It's
Hmm.
a pair of brothers who were professors at Stanford, and is it called Sticky Ideas or something like that? But their ideas is this: when you think about urban legends, right, urban myths,
Hmm.
we've all kind of heard the same ones, right? Like there's the guy who's in a hotel for business, he's at the bar and like this, person walks up to him, very attractive, and like buys him a drink and he's like, "Oh wow, like, this is my lucky day. I can't believe it's happening to me." And then he wakes up the next morning and he's in a bathtub full of ice and one of his kidneys is gone, right? There's like a
Hmm.
note that says like call 911, we took one of your kidneys or whatever it is. Like we've all kind of heard those same stories that are just like these urban myths that, baseless, but um, for whatever reason they get around. Like everyone
Yeah.
hears the same mythology. So like, why is that? What is it about that story? Whereas you think about all the companies that pay advertising executives so much to create these ad campaigns, and then they spend millions of dollars on these ads, and like most of them we completely ignore,
Hmm.
right? So you have on one hand like the urban legend that says some nonsense, but we've all heard it, and then the ads we all ignore even though they're paying a lot of money to get them in front of us. So what is it about those urban legends that make it stick,
Hmm.
right? And they break it down into, it's got to be um, concrete, so not like vague or hypothetical. It has to be something very concrete and unexpected. So if it's something you're expecting, it's not going to stick. And then like a number of other criteria, which when you start seeing the world that way, you're like, oh, that's why this idea took off,
Yeah.
right? When you think about some like weird health fad, right? It's like, okay, yeah, it's very specific. So eat like 5 grapefruits a day and nothing else, and you'll like live forever. It's like, okay, it's very specific and a very unexpected. The more unexpected, the better. The Atkins diet's a great example,
Mm.
right? Because it was like contrary to what everyone thought was true. So in terms of like messaging, that's definitely the thing that really like changed my outlook on what makes for an effective message.
Interesting. Well, yeah. Well, I'll find links to that, and I'll put that below. And then that genre sounds fun, like mountaineering. I'm really into like climbing and stuff like that. I've got real into, and like I find Alex Honnold to be a very compelling guy. Like, yeah, he's just a very super interesting guy. Interestingly, he very he's vegetarian for the most part, but he talks like a vegan sometimes. He talks like
Huh.
an environmental vegan in a sense. Like I know that's not veganism per se, but he seriously has concerns for the climate. So anyway, um, are there other, so you're with Animal Activists Legal Defense Project, so I'll link to them below. Are there other
Yeah.
places that you'd like for people to follow you, to follow your work?
If you could put a link to the National Lawyers Guild website also,
Yeah.
I think that would be useful because that's where folks can learn how to request legal observers.
Yeah. It sounds very useful, and I think, like you said, I think the movement needs to start utilizing that. Well, Darius, I just want to say, like, it is such an honor to have you on the program. Like, it means a lot to me. Your story is incredible. It's fascinating. I appreciate the amount of courage that you've had over the years, and how candid you are and how helpful you are being to the movement, like offering your services, your legal services, and how helpful you've been to the animals over the years, taking on the SHAC campaign, doing even all the stuff way back to the fur campaigns that you didn't think were maybe being effective at the time. And it's still like you were getting out there trying your best. So, I mean, our animal friends obviously thank you for that. And I thank you. And it's just an extraordinary story. I'll point out too, like, people should check out Animal People and read about the SHAC campaign, because I feel like there's tons of lessons to learn from that campaign, both positive and negative. And yeah, but yeah, I'm really glad that your life is what it is. It seems to be pretty awesome these days, and you're doing great stuff. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.